Hello and welcome to your award-winning The Reasons I'm Broke podcast, bringing you the reasons we're broke every week through news and headlines ranging from comics, movies, TV, video games, and more. I'm Daniel, and today we are going through sector number 452, as I have on the co-host chair this week the long-awaited return of Matt from the now retired Super Side Up podcast, but this is someone who is who does have podcasting experience, has been on the show before. I think it's been, at this point, almost 4 years since you've been on, but I was really thrilled when I reached out and you were willing to come on to help co-host the podcast along with the rest of the guys on the Reasons I'm Broke podcast. So Matt, thank you and welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's thank you for the invite, and it's an honor to join the esteemed core of Broquette co-host now.
To anyone not familiar with Matt, because it has been a little bit since we had you on, we had met through the Super Side Up podcast. I can't remember if it was through Twitter first, but it was neat to see that you were local to Orlando, to the Central Florida area, and that was a neat thing to see because I believe MegaCon even we had met up on there, right? Your memory might be better than mine.
Yeah, I had. Well, thankfully or unthankfully, like I don't have a kid, so my memory might be a little bit better. I don't have that energy to spend on kids, but I would love to have a kid as cool as Leo running around. But yes, when I had started up my podcast, I was just looking around for other podcasts to listen to that were kind of in the same space, and came across through Twitter the Reasons I Broke, and was amazed to see that you guys were local, and met you and Kelly at a MegaCon. It was also MegaCon where I got to meet Kevin Conroy, and you got a audio bite of him, and I missed out on that, getting that little audio clip, just pressing a little bit longer for a Batman intro for the podcast. And it's been great keeping in touch.
This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. You're listening to The Reasons I'm Broke.
And you had also put together this little Batman on Leo's blank cover. Do you remember that one?
Absolutely. Like to this day, every year it comes up in my Facebook memories, and I'm like, yeah, I did a cover with Jim Lee.
That's right. That's right. You did. You could always say that. Now, people might not be able to tell which one was Jim Lee or which one was yours. And that's one of the nice things that like Tom King does when he puts up a picture of Jim Lee's art and then his. He'll say, look, I'm not going to say whose is whose, but one of these is Jim's and one of these is mine.
I liked how he worked around the thumbprint on there.
Yeah, I didn't expect him to either. And that was a really neat surprise. And I remember, too, I just got that book back last year. I don't know if you were up to date on some of that. I didn't really share it too much on Twitter, but there was an artist I had met at Wizard World Chicago like a couple of years back. He was an artist on the Hanna-Barbera Super Friends. I don't even know if it was Hanna-Barbera, but the Super Friends cartoon. He had done some animation cells, and now he was going throughout the conventions. He had worked on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I had left them with the cover, and he had said he would have it done by the weekend. He didn't. So then he said, okay, I'll mail it to you. And 2 years later, I got it. But it was like years of, okay, it's been 3 months. Let me see. Last time I talked to him, he said, I'll mail it out next week. I have it done. Right. I'll mail it out next week. And it was just years of this back and forth to the point where.
Don't worry about it.
Normally I'd be like, and I told him at the end, I'm like, I don't care about the money that I paid you. I just want the book back. I don't, you don't even have to do any artwork on it. It's my son's footprint, and I've got all these other pieces on there. And that seemed to be the one where he finally, like 2 months later, sent it with an art piece. And I was like, I'm never doing that again with something with Leo's footprint, with Jim Lee, with everyone else's artwork on there. Because who knows if I would have ever seen that thing again.
Right. That's the footprint, especially, is something that you'll never get back because he's way outgrown that.
Exactly right. So it is back home now. Your artwork is in my Mylard comic pieces in my short box, safe and sound, never going anywhere again.
I still love that little Adam West Batman.
Yes, thank you.
It was fun to take part in that. It's also great that I just realized when you were saying the number, we're in sector 452. it's now like 10 years past DC's new 52 initiative. So it was like, okay, cool. We got some DC nerdiness going on.
Yeah, we do. I didn't even think about that. All right, let's jump right into this week's news. First one is a record breaker as Action Comics #1 has sold through a private sale $3.25 million. And this was through Comic Connect. They did the big announcement. They revealed this huge milestone at this point. It really is a seller's market. If anyone is not familiar, Action Comics #1 is, of course, the first appearance of Superman, but also Lois Lane. It was CGC graded at an 8.5. And to kind of give everyone perspective on where we're at in the market right now, a higher grade 9.0 had previously sold for $3.2 million in 2014. I believe that was a record in its own year. Now we're in a year where people really are blowing money on collectibles. They're reselling everything. You know, I work at a comic shop where I constantly run out of top loaders. Is this something that surprised you as $3.25 million hitting a single issue?
When I saw that 3.25, I'm like, I had to scratch my head for a second. It's like, are you sure it hasn't sold for higher before? And then I went back and looked at it. Like, yeah, it's been a while, but like that just means that that higher graded comic is gonna get sold in the next couple of years for twice as much.
Mm-hmm.
But it's amazing. In the last year, the world has completely changed, and anyone who had any Bitcoin, I wouldn't be surprised if whoever bought it had some Bitcoin. They decided to just cash in.
When they said it was a private seller, I'm thinking it is either someone with Bitcoin or a celebrity, someone that really is into Superman, and that's usually what I think of when I hear private seller. But I guess it could be, as you mentioned, someone that invested really well, or someone that just has a ton of property somewhere and they just don't want to be known for anything, and they're just collecting money elsewhere. But whoever has that copy now, do you think they're going to resell it a few years down the line, or do you think they are maybe legitimately Superman fans, or maybe someone that wants to collect a piece like that?
Oh, if you're dropping 3 million plus on one issue of Superman, you are a fan of Superman. Whether you think this is an investment or not, they're going to hold on to. They're at least going to hold on to it for a good decade.
So could be Nicolas Cage. I don't even know if he has 3.2 million right now, but
I don't think he got. I think he all that tax money he owed the IRS. I think when he sold his copy, I don't think he's in the position to go get that copy back. No one's paying him $20 million for a movie anymore.
I'm rooting for him. Come on, Face Off 2.
You know what? That's like peak Nicolas Cage before he'd gone like really crazy. Mm-hmm. And but I don't care how crazy that movie is. I loved Face Off. I'll watch another one.
So good.
Yeah.
A line from Action Comics #1 in the book itself, it says, quote, Superman is destined to reshape the destiny of a world. And once again, of course, he has reshaped the comic book world. CGC's primary grader, Matt Nelson, said, quote, This exciting sale affirms the value that CGC brings to the collectibles community with its authentication and grading services, end quote. What's your stance on CGC as a whole?
I think it's been a boon for people who are really trying to make it an investment, and for retailers who want known value. It's a brand you can trust. It's a name you can trust, and I think it's more power to them. Then I know there's been some craziness in like the collector card market, but as far as like comics go, it's like if it's got the CGC label on there, like I trust it.
That's one of the things that I tend to tell customers, especially because they tend to come to us for questions about CGC. They want to get books graded. And I know a lot of comic shops do have an account with them, but it's not something that we personally mess with because we have to handle the books to then send out to CGC, and then we have to handle them when they come back. And it's just a liability that frankly is not worth the money that we would be, whatever fee we would have. Mm-hmm. And it does attract a certain crowd of collectors that I personally don't want to necessarily interact more than I have to.
Yeah, the speculator market.
Exactly right. Yeah, the readership, great, awesome. You know, they're your subscribers. They're going to be there every week or at least every month to pick up the latest books. But the speculators, you'll see them once in a while, and then if they actually buy something off your stands, it's just because they're going to flip it or CGC it down the road.
Yeah, how to spot a speculator. They're buying 2 copies of the same comic.
That's right. Or they're trying to. The smart ones now at my shop will bring in like their wife or their kid, and then they're like 2 separate. And I'm like, all right, yeah, you know, but that's fine. If they, you know, if they want to drag their significant other, that go for it. You know, I did my part. On to some Spider-Verse news, and it is one of my favorite Marvel movies overall, and I'm excited to see what Sony does with this sequel. But Daniel Barnes, who is known as the 90s animated Spider-Man star, Christopher Daniel Barnes, he responded to rumors, and this is something that my coworker brought up to me, of him being in final negotiations to star in Into the Spider-Verse 2. And on Instagram, he said, quote, "I just wanted to take a moment to address this rumor that has been floating around the internet and actually getting quite some traction. I keep getting a lot of questions about it, which is saying that I am somehow involved or negotiations to be involved with the next Spider-Man movie. I wish it was true." End quote. Did this one come across your radar?
Yeah, and I hope it ends up just being true. And he's just giving the actual line that until negotiations are actually done, his Spider-Man, that series from the 90s, is iconic. Probably the closest comparison as far as, you know, iconography for Spider-Man animated series would be Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends in the early 80s, and then the original 60s cartoon. They've tried a few times since, a few different series since then, and to mix results, but the 90s one is iconic. It has an iconic theme song, and I hope they bring him in. It would be foolish not to.
It would be a huge get, especially since so a generation of Spider-Man fans grew up on this being the voice actor. It'd be like them making a Into the Batverse and never having Kevin Conroy in some capacity. Now, Barnes isn't quite to. I mean, the comparison here is not quite the same because Barnes, well, he has appeared in some of the video games, like as Spider-Man 2099 and Spider-Man Noir. You know, Kevin Conroy has been the voice of a trilogy of award-winning games and has shown up in the CW as himself as Batman.
Yeah,
you know, so
that was awesome.
But it would be smart for them to try to somehow fit him in, even if it's while they're world jumping or anything, just to kind of give us a little bit of that. And I doubt he'd be breaking the bank for Sony.
Oh yeah, I doubt it too. It would be great if if it were somehow interacting with the Spider-Man 2099 from the end, even if it's a little cameo from the end of Into the Spider-Verse 1. Just a little nod, a little something there. I handled that movie so well. It was like pure adrenaline on screen, so many different styles, and it would be a great nod to just tip your hat to an iconic Spider-Man series.
Is there a multiverse Spider-Man that you personally are hoping to see in Spider-Verse 2 aside from animated series Spider-Man?
I would really love to see if they could pull off like Todd McFarlane's like spaghetti webbing yes. Spider-Man.
That's a good pick. That's a great one. And it would have to be kind of like a take on a more gritty version of Spider-Man, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, especially if you read like when he got to launch his own Spider-Man series, he was really wordy. In fact, the Nicolas Cage Spider-Man Noir, a lot of how he was talking was a little grandiose along the lines of how McFarlane wrote his captions for Spider-Man, which he could not it was reading a book. He was overwriting it, but I think it would be a good comic tone to give to that version of Spider-Man. You mean super gritty, but he's so talkative.
He'd have to do all of the crazy poses that he would do where he'd have the knees over his head and that kind of thing. Yep. That was one of the things that I remember watching one of the McFarlane live streams that he does now on YouTube. And he says he used to challenge himself he would draw like a weird shape, just something that was not conventional. And then he would see if he could fit Spider-Man into that shape. And that would make him create different poses and different cool ways of doing Spider-Man, which became the signature style, I think, right after that, because you do see a lot of artists now make that very animated sort of Spidey that, and even the webbing too. That's another one that he says that the webbing didn't look like it does now, and it wouldn't unless it were him, and he's happy to take credit for all of it.
Oh yeah, his spaghetti webbing was, as he called it, was iconic and copied by tons of artists. Even like Eric Larson adjusted how he did his Spider-Man based off of McFarlane's, and a good number of artists followed that. And it wasn't until like I think within the last 10, 15 years where they started kind of toning that back.
The one Spider-Man that I was hoping we may see and could have seen in the first Spider-Verse was Superior Spider-Man, Doc Ock Spidey. And that's probably the one that I'm hoping personally. I'm not a massive Spider-Man reader. That was probably one of the only series that I religiously followed for the character. And I just loved it. As soon as I remember Dan Slott was, and my opinion on the guy is him personally is different right now. But at the time he was talking about how he got all of these death threats and terrible tweets and mail when he killed Peter Parker, even though it's comic book death. We all knew that it's like, all right, it's going to be for a few years and then we'll bring back Peter Parker. But until then, let's do this interesting thing. And I loved that run so much that when they brought back Peter, I was like, fuck Dan Slott. What's he fucking doing bringing back Peter Parker? No, man, I want Doc Ock Spidey. This is way better. And that's when I dropped off of the series. So kind of had the opposite effect. It'd be cool to see that on the big screen right now.
But would they do like the Doc Ock from the first Into the Spider-Verse movie? Would it be like her now, like doing a whole like playing off of transphobia or people changing their choosing the gender identity that they feel that they are?
Yeah, that could be a neat take on it. And I'm assuming she lived. Who knows what happened in the. I know she got hit by a bus when they were at multi-dimensioning warping and all that.
Yep.
Spider-Verse 2 is currently set to release next year on October 7th, and I plan to be there on opening weekend.
If I feel comfortable being back in movie theater, sure.
And I hope that a lot of movie theaters make it through this year, which I know is very difficult. I have a friend who works for AMC, and he's talking. I know he was not happy when they delayed Black Widow, because that was when his company was planning on like, all right, let's get the ball rolling, let's get more staff on. And then when that got pushed back, he was like, okay, well, that really screwed us. And I know they're not getting help from the government as far as I can tell. Right.
And it's weird because around the same time that like the pandemic and shutdowns hit, I had been going, like I used to be, whatever movie, if there was a movie coming out that weekend, I don't care what it was, I was going to a movie every weekend. And as time wore on, like I've been going less and less, because now it's weird that they've introduced this luxury seating where you're in this reclining seat and you get as comfortable as you want. Well, I get a little too comfortable, and if I'm older now, so I go into one of those movies and I will fall asleep. If I go to a movie that starts after 8 o'clock, I'm gonna fall asleep. So that's where I've kind of like have gone. If I don't know when I'll step back in the theater, not because of COVID, but because I'm just gonna fall asleep.
Father Time, undefeated, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Forgives no one.
No, not at all. We do have more Sony news, though. According to The Hollywood Reporter, Sony Pictures and Netflix have inked a deal that Netflix will get first pay window rights for their theatrical and home release windows. The deal will take effect with 2022 releases. It will also give Netflix the option to license rights of Sony's back catalog of movies. There was a lot of speculation over whether Sony was going to try to have their own streaming service. They have a lot of content. We could definitely have seen that happening. But instead, they're taking I think what is the smarter and safer route right now of, okay, so who will pay us the most for our catalog instead? They're probably looking at this like, okay, we don't have the infrastructure to try to compete with Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, Disney Plus. So instead, highest bidder, all right, here you go. Here's a 5-year deal, and then we'll revisit in 5 years and see who's the top dog at that point.
You know what? I'm about it. Whatever keeps Disney on their toes, because Netflix is obviously their biggest competitor in the streaming market. And there's always some weird twist in the whole Sony and Disney relationship, and this could be another twist in it, because Sony has said for years that they want to develop their own, Spider-Man, connected. They have like whatever the rights are to the Spider-Man characters, whatever that involves. They've talked about wanting to develop those for years, and if Netflix could end up being a partner for that, and you could see them developing, like they've been talking about doing a Silver Sable series or movie series and Black Cat, and like that could end up being, replacing the properties they lost, like Daredevil and Luke Cage, and Netflix, they make quality content.
They really do. And one of the things that they were clear about here is that the Venom sequel is going to be a part of the Netflix deal, but that Spider-Man Homecoming 3 will not be on Netflix, but it's not clear yet on whether or not it'll go on Disney Plus right off the bat.
I don't think, unless I haven't checked in a few weeks, but I still don't think that the MCU, the first two Spider-Man movies in the MCU, I don't think those are on Disney Plus either. Like, I think you've got to go through like other services to get those. So anyone who's wanting to watch, the MCU movies, they have to go someplace else to find those movies to watch them in sequence.
That does make sense, because I remember when they were doing the how do we get paid for these movies, they're going to split the profit in some form. They were saying that Sony got the ticket sales, and then Disney got, I believe they said Blu-ray sales after that, but I'm sure somewhere in that deal was the streaming rights, and obviously it sounds like they went to Sony.
Yeah, I think it was something like Sony got first dollar opening weekend, and then Disney's, like, their share would increase each succeeding week, and then I believe they got Disney got merch, and Sony got most box office, or vice versa. It's I don't know what the new deal entailed, like, where he's going to be in one more Spider-Man movie and then one more Avengers movie or something like that. But it's an interesting relationship, to be sure. I think, hats off to Sony for having rebounded, because before Into the Spider-Verse, there had been talks and rumors of, they were going to sell their film division, where they had that big Sony hack and a lot of the emails that leaked that ended up leading towards Disney and Sony making a deal to bring Spider-Man into the MCU. They were at the time looking to sell the division because they hadn't really had a good track record at the box office in a number of years. I think James Bond was the only thing that was hitting, and then since right around the time of Into the Spider-Verse, and since, they've been hitting on all cylinders. So they survived, and now they're a competitor and have some leverage over Disney, which is, it's good that someone has some kind of leverage over them just to keep them on their toes.
I am very excited for Venom 2, the Morbius film. Jared Leto is a phenomenal actor. Those are connected to the MCU in some form, right? That's what I kept reading.
I haven't. The Tom Hardy Venom movie, when I heard that it wasn't going to have much or anything to do with Spider-Man, I still haven't taken the time to watch it. It doesn't look like it's something that interests me. Like, Tom Hardy interests me. Mm-hmm. Venom without Spider-Man, that's a key component of the Venom origin. To see one without it, it's kind of like, I still haven't seen the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix, because
so good.
That's what everyone tells me. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, it's Joker origin where Batman has nothing to do with the origin. Like, I know that they tie the Waynes in there somewhere, but it's specifically Batman and Joker, and they both tie into or he ties into the Joker's origin, and he's a key component of becoming the Joker. And when I saw there's no Batman, my interest dropped. I'll eventually watch it. It's just not high on my priority list, unfortunately.
It's funny that you brought up the Venom thing, because I remember when they announced the Venom movie, I was saying even on here on the show that it's a character that could not carry his own movie, does not have an interesting enough story for that. And I was against him being included in Spider-Man 3. And people kept saying after Spider-Man 3, he should have been in the movie way more. He should have his own solo film. And I'm like, what the fuck are you guys talking about, solo film? And then they cast Tom Hardy, and I'm like, motherfuckers got me. I'm going to see this for Tom Hardy now.
Well, hey, they knew your trigger. They did it just for you.
And now I'm a fucking fan of it. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, Jesus, now I can't wait for Venom 2. Holy shit.
What a strange world we're in.
It's really bizarre. We had brought up a little bit of what COVID has done, the new weird reality we are in. It seems like there's this optimism right now over the world getting back to quote unquote normal. And I know some countries are further along. I believe China, Godzilla was a pretty big hit over there in theaters. So they're further along as far as I can tell on getting the spikes down and getting more people out and about. One of the things that I saw in this Bleeding Cool article is a solution for movie theaters, something that ideas for them to rebound during this year of no blockbusters, really, no people flocking to the movie theaters, no tentpole films that could keep them going along, and especially with no help. And one of the things that this article suggested was making theaters vaccination centers because they're empty and they're large. Some of them were saying replaying blockbusters, doing free movie tickets with vaccine doses, and obviously the clearest solution is to actually get new movies into the theaters. Do you see a 2022 or even late 2021 of movie theaters existing? And if so, what do you think they could do, or what do you think of these ideas that Bleeding Cool presented?
I think making them vaccination sites is a brilliant idea. A lot of movie theaters I know that have been able to stay open, at least in Florida, have been relying on playing old movies like the Universal at Cinemark at Universal City Walk. They were playing like Jurassic Park, Beetlejuice, like old movies that like probably haven't had a theatrical run in easily, 15, 20 years. And I had intended to go, but back in December, both my fiance and I got COVID, and we, even though we were careful, we really didn't go out. Unfortunately, I work in retail, so like you work in retail, we can't completely avoid the public.
No.
And so like we decided that as far as like movies go, we're trying to avoid any large gatherings until we got to that herd immunity point, and at least she and I have got our first dose of our vaccine, so we got that second dose coming next week. So we're starting to, ease our way back into that. And hopefully by the end of this year, like it'd be nice to go see a movie again in a theater, not necessarily with a crowd, but just like have it on that big screen experience. And I think it's going to be another year or so before you're seeing people returning to like largely across the country, returning to movie theaters. I know in Florida, people tried to reopen everything as quickly as they could for good or ill, and things are a little bit more normal here. But I think in a year nationwide, things will start returning more normal. But now that streaming has got like that toehold in, that window has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter as new media has developed, from VHS to DVDs to streaming. That window from theatrical to premium services or streaming services has shrunk ever so. And now that theaters know that the big distributors will go straight to streaming against whatever they want, then I think theaters are going to have to figure out a new way to bring in other people, to bring people back in. But I feel like the larger chains will figure it out, and in another year or so it'll be back to normal for them.
I'm glad you brought up the streaming windows that are going on right now. Warner Brothers recently said that for 2022, they plan on dropping the dual release between HBO Max and theaters and going theatrical first. before they eventually move their movies to whatever streaming service is going to pay them for it. Do you think that that's them giving a vote of confidence to these large theatrical chains so that it doesn't upset them, like it did with Universal and AMC at one point?
I think it's twofold. I think it's throwing the theaters a bone and also trying to repair that relationship they had with their partners and their directing talent, and a lot of them were very upset that they decided with almost no notice. A lot of them found out through Twitter that, hey, we're going day and date with both streaming and theatrical. But I think some of them kind of blew it out of proportion, where it's like, how long do you want them to sit on all this content? They have to put something out, this kind of stuff. Otherwise, in a year or two, you're going to have too much content out there and everything's going to get watered down. I think it's they're trying to mend fences with theaters and talent.
I almost thought that this was going to be the model moving forward for not just HBO Max, but Disney Plus was doing their $30 own/rentals for movie theater releases. And I kind of feared that this was going to be it, especially since a lot of people were able to watch Godzilla vs. Kong, the Snyder Cut, everything that's been coming, even the $30 payouts of Mulan. People were happy to just stream it at home and not go to the theaters to watch these things. And I didn't hear a lot of complaining about it. But it does sound like, I guess, their intentions are, we're going to be there next year when the theaters, we hope, are completely back open. But I don't know, man. Like, part of me thought that there were going to be new contracts drawn up for if there's a second pandemic, or if we decide to go straight to streaming with this film, we will give you X amount of dollars. And if we go the theatrical route, then we will give you a percentage of the ticket sales. And I don't know. It's kind of a weird. I didn't expect Warner Brothers to make that move personally.
It was very surprising, it was one that I was willing to bring on or welcome. I understand that it was going to ruffle some feathers, but at the same time, it kind of gave them a little competitive edge for a subscriber base to as far as like Disney Plus goes, because Disney wants to charge it, and I don't know what their thinking is for charging $30 for some and none for like the Pixar movies that have released on. They haven't charged any premium for those, but they wanted to charge $30 for Raya and the Last Dragon, which I didn't even hear about until about a month before it came out. I can see why they would want to do that with Black Widow, because they believe, honestly, that's if I were them, I would probably do it on that movie because the MCU brand has legs with a lot of people. But at the same time, you've now released, by that time that will now come out, if it holds with its July date, you'll have 3 other series that have now premiered on Disney Plus, and so people know that they have other Marvel content that they can get. That if they want to wait for that to be free on the service or part of the service and without the extra premium charge, they can. One of the things that's been making it easier for me, as far as like waiting for movies to come out, is like there's so much content. Every streaming service has so much new content, and it's all, like, by and large, it's so good. Like, I have too much to watch. So if a movie's coming out that I'm really looking forward to, I honestly can wait for that window for it to come to streaming, for streaming without having to see it in the theater.
Especially with things like Vudu, where you can rent them for $3, $4, $9.99 sometimes if it's a newer release. It does make it very easy to stay at home and rent a movie or buy it straight up digitally. But I think it'll be interesting to see a year from now where we're at as far as streaming and theaters. And I will always root for the theaters, though. I used to work at one. I still go to the movies. I watched the Godzilla vs. Kong at Cinemark, and that's where I wanted to watch it. When the Snyder Cut eventually makes its rounds into IMAX theaters, I'll be there to watch it there. But younger generations and people with families, I really want to see if they come back in 2022.
Yeah, I really hope theaters find a way. Even though, like, I find just seeing them at home mostly now, I hope theaters figure it out and survive and thrive again. I watched the documentary, The Last Blockbuster, and it was like super nostalgic. Just I was in the blockbuster generation. I remember, when they first popped up and going to Blockbuster and walking the aisles every Friday night and seeing stuff that I hadn't seen in years or new titles, just that box sitting on the shelf and watching that. Like I wanted to get a plane ticket and go visit the last Blockbuster. And it's crazy how they've survived and they're still around. And so I hope, that it is a communal experience that like a whole generation had, and if theaters go away, that I think it's a communal thing that needs to survive for each generation, and I hope theaters figure it out.
There's definitely something to be said about experiencing a movie on the big screen. And that's the one way that Zach said he wanted his theater or his Snyder Cut to be experienced. Christopher Nolan famously said that Tenet needed to be experienced on the big screen. And we do have Snyder Cut news because it is the Reasons I'm Broke podcast. And even after the movie's released, there's always buzz about Restore the Snyderverse. There was a new Vanity Fair interview with Oscar-winning screenwriter Chris Terrio, who of course did Argo. And he spoke out about his thoughts on the theatrical cut of Justice League. He said, quote, "The 2017 theatrical cut was an act of vandalism. Zack Snyder, director, may be too much of a gentleman to say that, but I'm not," end quote. What are your thoughts about him being straight about the theatrical cut of Justice League?
First of all, can I tell you how excited I was that there was something related to the Snyder Cut in Newswise to talk about, just to lead into talking about the Snyder Cut?
Yeah, let's go.
Because I could spend a whole podcast and plus just talking about the Snyder Cut. But Chris Terrio was fucking robbed, and we all know like I'm a DC guy. I've got DC tattooed. I've got it all over me. I've got a Batman tattoo. I've got a Just League tattoo. I've got Martian Manhunter owns one arm. And when I saw Justice League, I think I came out of there liking it, but I knew how bad it was. And it was liking it more because I got to see all my favorite, DC heroes on the big screen. It was the same feeling I had when I watched The Phantom Menace years ago. And it was like, something's wrong here. Something's really wrong. And I was excited when Chris Terrio was a writer on the project and moving forward, like with Justice League 2, what was supposed to be Justice League 2, because he partnered with Affleck on Argo, and he's an Oscar-winning screenwriter. And so like he's not going to give you garbage. And what we got was, I don't know what we got. We got Joss Whedon. I mean, he clearly rewrote and reshot most of what had been filmed and written. So I'm glad that he's not a gentleman and he can speak out a bit. He definitely should have had his name taken off of it. Zack Snyder should have had his name taken off of the theatrical release because, for those who have seen both, how much. I mean, even if it was the exact same 2 hours that ended up in the theaters, there's still 2 more hours that got added on top of that. So there's no way they're the same movie. And then when you compare what came out and on HBO Max to what Joss Whedon did, they're completely different movies. Mm-hmm. So Chris Terrio, you know what? Hats off to you, dude. Get yours.
I love this interview. I went and read the whole thing, and he was talking about how he himself is a very cynical person. And they were talking about the outcome and what happened with Justice League, and that one of the reasons why they were talking about the tone of BVS and the Snyder Cut, and how he's like, for him, it's easy to write these scenes and write these kinds of plots because he described himself as that, being cynical. And he said when he worked with Zach, though, the reason it was so easy to work with him and the reason he got along so well with him is that Zach can do dark tones, but that Zach himself was not a cynic, and he's still not, even after all the stuff that he's gone through. They're constantly talking about how much of a nice guy he is.
It really amazed me. Yeah, all the talent that's worked with him says nothing but glowing things about him, and it's really someone who sacrifices and devotes himself to his art. I've for years called him like he's a thinking man's Michael Bay. He'll stage spectacle, but I don't know that there's anyone that puts as much thought into like literally every frame of an action scene or devotes, like he really, really puts everything he's got into him. And whenever you see any behind the scenes stuff, he's always smiling.
Mhm.
Like he gets $200 million to go play with things that we played with as kids.
What's amazing about Zach too is, like you said, he puts so much in his frames and in his movies that we're still discovering things from Man of Steel to BVS to the Snyder Cut. And then when you see where he was going with it, you can look back on certain scenes, like in BVS, when you see the actual sound waves, you don't really see them when you're watching it. But if people have slowed down the frames from BVS and they're like, oh shit, he even put those sound waves from the beginning of the Snyder Cut back then years ago into that, knowing that this is going to be the direction of it. And it's just amazing that I think for years we're still going to be discovering things in the Snyder Cut, in Man of Steel, in BVS, and even in non-DC films as well.
Yeah, it was interesting, like watching that opening of Zack Snyder's Justice League, where everything was in slow-mo and you saw like how far the sound waves went and gave it this mythic tone. And when you go back and watch it in BVS, it's something that's like a half second, a half a second on film. Like it's just like you think it's just the burst of like all this energy, both Doomsday and him just dropped to the ground. Like, no, that burst was his scream going across the globe. And yeah, he's really set up something really mythic. And that's kind of like, even in the comics, that's what's really set DC apart from Marvel, is that Marvel's characters are people who are like men who become gods, and DC's are gods who think they're men.
Exactly. Yes.
And so like, they really gave a whole mythic tone to it, and just how important Superman is. And I mean, I have very complicated feelings about Man of Steel, but when BVS came out and finally got to see the whole 3-hour cut, I could see that he was moving towards like slowly over a series of films, building up that Superman that everyone complains that Henry Cavill's Superman wasn't. Like his Superman in Man of Steel was kind of dour, like his arrival was akin to a nuclear bomb going off, and he wasn't like the Christopher Reeve always smiling, happy-go-lucky big blue Boy Scout Superman that we wanted. But as you can see, like even his costume was a little bit more color saturated in BVS, and it was starting to build towards that, where he gave Batman hope, and Batman was starting to change. And so I could see over the course of his 5 films that he wanted to do, that he was, by the end of that series, we were building to that Superman that everyone wanted, but rejected when Brandon Routh and Bryan Singer did Superman Returns.
Yeah, and that's one of the weird things, that people ask for that classic Christopher Superman, and they tried to sell it to the general public with Superman Returns, and it didn't do well. And people complained that it didn't have enough action, and that the best scene was when he caught the airplane. So they hired someone like Zach, who does action extremely well, and said, here, can you do Superman? And he punched it up to what people asked for. They wanted more action in Superman. They wanted this Kryptonian raging god that we did not get, that we get in the comics. When it's time to fight, he will, there will be destruction. But instead it's like, and we got the darkness from the Dark Knight trilogy that was unavoidable, because that's the studio going, and it was originally set to be in the same universe as the Nolan universe. He's still a producer even up to the Snyder Cut, probably because of that. But it was going to have that tone, because that's, once again, the studio telling Zach it needs to fit in the world of the Dark Knight, which is extremely dark tone-wise. So that's what we got with Man of Steel. And since then, it's grown into the Snyderverse, into his own thing.
Yeah, they gave us a post 9/11 Superman because we told studios, we told Warner Brothers that we didn't want the 70s, 80s, smiling Superman. We wanted something else. So we got what we asked for. And what I didn't like about it was that it brought Superman down to our level, not brought us up to his level. But as you see the progression going from where he's at in, as BVS ends, where he comes back in Justice League, and what they've talked about, where his plan was to go. He was basically brought Superman down to our level, and then with each movie, he's bringing us up with a rebuilding Superman.
And the whole time you brought up Batman being filled with hope, and that's one of the biggest things that Zach, I think, focuses on with the character, or at least his version of Superman, is that he is someone that at his lowest in BVS, he says no one stays good in this world, but still does not opt to kill Batman, even when Batman is about to kill him with the kryptonite spear. He will still not go down to that level and is willing to die for his world and for these people, which are now his. So even his Superman is not without hope, is not hopeless. He still embodies a huge characteristic of the character, and it's interesting how in each of these films he has been that. And I think in the Snyder Cut with his return, I know you're dying to talk about the movie, and I don't know if you got the same impression, but when he returned and he was resurrected, it's still the Snyder Superman, but it's not the Man of Steel one. There's something off and different about him.
Yeah, it was actually one of the things that I liked in that they definitely did better in the Snyder Cut, but in Justice League, when he's kind of laughing with Cyborg, where they had stopped, the mother boxes, and he was like, I don't want to die again. So like they kind of did that in the more serious version here, and I was happy to see him back, and I loved the with the black suit and the explaining the function behind it. It's actually like solar panels, so it's kind of like supercharging him. And I got the feeling in Joss League they told this one, they showed that he was grateful to be back, and he didn't know why or what he was going to do, but it seemed like someone who was reborn in a way. He seemed like he was more hopeful.
What were your thoughts on the Snyder Cut now that it's out? And this is just a warning to anyone that hasn't seen the Snyder Cut. There's going to be spoilers, and I'm dying to ask you that's the warning. All right, Martian Manhunter fan, seeing him show up for the first time on the big screen as in a film.
I have questions. First of all, awesome. I geeked out. My fiance will tell you that when he showed up on screen both times, I damn near squeezed her leg off because I was super excited. I love that it was the actor. Was it Harry Lennox?
Yeah.
Great choice bringing him on. Making him Martian Manhunter. The question I have is, at what point has General Swan always been Martian Manhunter, or did he just, for those couple of scenes, he took over like he was masquerading as Martha Kent and then General Swan, or now Secretary of Defense Swan? Has he always been that? And if so, why didn't he show up during a battle he was clearly needed for in Man of Steel? So that's where I have questions. But I'm very excited, and if they don't follow up on that, they're making a huge mistake. I mean, there's Warner Brothers, the studio right now, that's filled with huge mistakes when it comes to their DC properties and how they handle it, and I blame Harry Potter.
Why Harry Potter? Yeah, I want to hear this one.
So, for those who aren't aware, Warner Brothers has owned DC Comics since the 70s, and they basically let DC Comics, they minded their own business. They really, the only things they were playing with were like Batman or Superman as far as like movies. They would kind of let DC do what they wanted to do. Then they have these Harry Potter books, and they're making movies. They're getting towards the end, and like, well, we're coming to the 7th book. We need to stretch this out because these are making us tons of money, and let's split this up into 2 movies. And then what else do we got? What can we follow up with this? And someone suddenly realized that, hey, we have this gigantic, gigantic intellectual property farm that with this rich history that we've done virtually nothing with except a couple of Superman and Batman movies over the last 20, 30 years. Like, we've done almost nothing with the breadth of the DC universe. And they we don't have any more Harry Potter books, so we need to start micromanaging the crap out of DC. And even like their comics line, I'm glad for all the TV content that we've been getting, but I feel like their comics line has been negatively impacted by Warner Brothers finally remembering that they had this in their backyard for decades and did almost nothing with it.
That makes a lot more sense then, because they are desperate to fill that void of what Harry Potter ended up being, and that's the perfect word for it, micromanaging, because it seemed like they kept constantly, they wouldn't trust in a direction. They would constantly shift directions, and I think the most obvious glaring one was Justice League, in which you had this director's voice, this director's tone that was moving forward. These movies were making money. Man of Steel made a lot of money, BVS, Suicide Squad, and then it was until Justice League and that change that the movies since then have not reached that peak of box office, except for Joker and Aquaman, and one of which isn't a part of the Snyderverse at all, and one that they didn't expect to make as much money as it did. But all of their other tries to get to that level again, and Wonder Woman, of course, as well. But since then, they haven't reached that peak, and I think that's where they I don't know if you want to call it overcorrecting or just not trusting in one direction. It truly is now an absolute mess, and especially with these toxic creatives that some are still with the company and some thankfully are no longer, but are still waiting to get some accountability on.
Yeah, it's really weird how, like, when it comes to like their tour filmmakers, like your Christopher Nolan's, Ben Affleck, when he wants to do a movie, they'll completely back up their vision, their creative vision, on something that they bring to them, like a script that they bring to them or a property they bring to them that isn't like a licensed or pre-existing property. But when it comes to like DC, it's like, I don't know how, like where the breakdown is that you ever seen the movie Moneyball?
Yes. One of my favorites.
So it's kind of like they're being managed by Brad Pitt's character. What was it? Was it Brandon
Billy
Bean?
Bean.
Billy Bean. Brandon Bean's someone else. He's in the NFL. But Billy Bean, yeah, where you've got Billy Bean who's like looking at everything that Marvel's doing and say, okay, when we've got this joke here, when we have like, a joke every 5 minutes, this movie makes this much. But when we have a joke every 30 seconds, this movie makes this much. So he's looking at like statistically breaking down Marvel movies and saying, okay, we need this in our movies in order to be as successful as them. Whereas like Warner Brothers is known as an auteur studio. They routinely are in awards conversation. They routinely have like strong voices. That's why a lot of people like go to that studio because they feel creatively backed up. But when it comes to like the DC movies, why they haven't backed up, like Zack Snyder is someone who is definitely a visionary. Like there's no mistaking a Zack Snyder movie. Whereas like and I know how your feelings on the MCU. I enjoy the MCU, but by and large, they all look like they're the same. It's the same director from from movie to movie to movie. Mm-hmm. It's like they have a house style, but Zack Snyder has definitely a much more mature vision.
One of the things I keep seeing on Twitter is Warner Brothers, DC Films, they just need to have their own Kevin Feige. And my response is always, they had him already. It was Zack Snyder, but they wouldn't let him do what he does best.
I don't think I never got the impression from Zack Snyder that he wanted to be a Kevin Feige. Like he wanted to do his 5 films. I do believe that to manage a universe that they do need someone. And until I found out all the toxic shit that Geoff Johns was involved in, with regards to Justice League and him enabling all that crap, that I thought Geoff Johns was being positioned as being that because he started in Hollywood before he went to comics. He was Richard Donner's assistant for years, and I thought he was being positioned to be that creative, overseer that sets the direction of how we're going to interconnect these movies. I think Zach just wanted to make his particular movies, and that's fine. I don't think he wanted to be the Kevin Feige, though.
When I mean that they had his Kevin Feige already, is that, and maybe I don't fully understand what Kevin does over at Disney, aside from if directors want to do their own thing or not necessarily fit into what other movies have done, that's when they get rid of him, like they did with the Ant-Man director and someone recently, I believe, as well. But for Zach, this was the universe, this was the setup, and I feel like from what I've seen in other interviews too, is he was like, okay, well, these are the characters that many of which he had cast, these icons in DC Comics, and he says, okay, and this is the direction we're going in. These are the stories. This is the plan. you can make Wonder Woman, you can make Aquaman or whatever, but it has, this is where we're going. So make whatever you want, but just know that this is where we're going to end up at some point. So try not to.
I think like their Kevin Feige should have been like the person who was like, okay, here's the main line. Here's the central story we're telling. Whoever these other movies, like, Patty Jenkins making her Wonder Woman, James Wan doing his Aquaman, like it just needs to tie back into this. Like it tonally, it has to feel like the same world. But Zach's is the vision. They just needed someone to like captain that ship who wasn't like looking at the raw, like just like trying to micromanage it and saying, no, you can do this, but you can't do that. I just think that Zach's had the vision. They needed other people to bend to that and not make him bend to statistics.
Yeah, studio mandates and all of that.
Yeah.
The reality of it right now is Warner Brothers clearly does not want anything to do with Zach's vision of these DC characters.
Which is a shame because it's distinctive as hell.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if it's her egos or something, who knows, but it's AT&T and HBO Max that are for seeing, at least they brought us the Snyder Cut. AT&T was the one who mandated, no, we're going to put $70 million into this, and that's the rumored number right now, and we're going to make this happen on HBO Max. Zach and Deborah wanted a year to complete the cut, and they said, you have 6 months, and they made it happen in 6 months. So right now we're sitting on a 4-hour cut that somehow critics and bloggers loved. I did not expect that. I thought they were absolutely going to torpedo it. They did not. It's like a weird best case scenario. Like I was talking to, I believe it was Vega that I had brought this up on, of things went so positively that even the fan base, like, people like you and I that are into these DC films did not expect this outcome. Where do you see the future, if there is one, of Justice League 2 and 3 possibly happening?
I think Toby Emmerich is the only thing standing in the way of that at HBO Max, because HBO Max greenlit and gave him that money to finish his cut before Toby Emmerich was put in charge of HBO Max. And Toby Emmerich was one of the people who was fighting with Zach on, before he stepped down to replace him with Joss Whedon. You get Toby Emmerich out of there. I think they're just gonna like cut Zach a check to like have your own Zack Snyder hub on HBO Max, because we know Netflix wants him. Netflix is in the Zack Snyder business with his Army of the Dead, and they're doing the anime series. Like they absolutely want him. HBO Max, you want a competitor, a strong competitor. You lock him up. You let him finish his story. You bring in other people, like you could do a mini series. Like I would love to see what Ben Affleck had in mind for his Batman, and Joe Manganiello, like bring him back as Deathstroke. Give him his Deathstroke movie, or have him do that version of Batman that they were talking about, where it's going to be heavily influenced the game. Make it a 4-6 hour mini series. I mean, the dude obviously he's one of us. He's a nerd. He's a gamer. He was willing to like bleach his hair, shave a mohawk, and grow out that goatee for what amounted to 2 minutes of extra film time. So like he's on board with doing more Deathstroke, and like you just don't let that go.
Did you get the same impression that the epilogue scene, the additional photography that they did, all involved actors that probably ahead of time agreed, if we get more out of this, we're all in for Justice League 2 and 3?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think it would have been actors that Zach would have been like, all right, well, let's put you in here, but you don't want to do any more.
Yeah, no, I think everyone who showed back up in there was like, I'm on board, because I was really excited to see Jared Leto back, because I don't understand like the hate that he gets for his Joker, because I mean clearly there's a ton of material we haven't seen, and hopefully we'll get an air cut, and we'll get to see what he really intended with that Joker. The only thing I didn't like about his Joker was I just thought he was a little over designed with all the like too many tattoos. I would have liked something a little bit more simple, but it's a version of Joker we've seen before. It's the gangster Joker. Like every version of live action Joker has been distinctive and well done. There hasn't been a bad live action Joker. And I would have loved to see where he would go how you go to Batman, like what does he have to sacrifice to partner with Deathstroke and Joker? So, and I love to see more Cyborg.
Yeah,
Cyborg was fantastic.
and that's one of the things that Ray was saying of he'll come back for Zach. He'll do whatever he wants, but he won't do any more projects under Hamada, which is all the Warner Brothers pictures and including that Flash film that who knows what is going on with all of that and everything else that's on the Warner Brothers side of DC Films. But do you feel pretty confident that, because they haven't released the numbers yet for the Snyder Cut. They released the numbers for Godzilla versus Kong. They were very quick to do that. And I don't know if it's because that's a Warner Brothers property and there's a whole different thing there. But do you think they're waiting on trumpeting the success that was the Snyder Cut to announce it along with deals to do Justice League 2 and 3? Or do you think there's a big giant misstep here of celebrate this giant hit? Why aren't you going out and putting out news and headlines of how great this did for your service?
I think it comes down to a lot of egos because it's weird, this anti-Zack sentiment in Warner Brothers, even though like everyone who's in charge of that studio right now weren't the people that were in charge when he first made it. And so it's a lot of this like inherited, who had nothing to do with the original one, or inheriting this fandom, calling for releasing the Snyder Cut, to, okay, we did it, to, okay, why, it's weird how there's this air of, we don't want this to be a success because we have these other things, like rather than like, making minor tweaks to these other movies to make it fit that vision. It's like, and they keep wanting trumpeting how we're going to dive into this multiverse thing. Like, okay, well then, you know what? Jump in it. The TV show, like, TV shows were great in like that. Okay, we've got this great multiverse. They even brought Ezra Miller's Flash into the Crisis on Infinite Earths for a scene. It was the biggest surprise in that series. Like, no one knew it was coming, and then all of a sudden, like, oh hey, two Flashes, the two most prominent Flashes are in the same scene together. So like, okay, the multiverse exists. Like, you can explain any discrepancies. That's how they did it in the comics. Like, oh, well, this Aquaman movie was just like universe adjacent to the one that we saw. Like, there's been slight changes. You could lead into a cinematic, Flashpoint or Crisis on Infinite Earths, and like, there's how they're not celebrating success openly. Like, I can only imagine that there's definitely something going on behind the scenes that we're not privy to. And if they're willing to pump up the numbers of how well Kong did, I think they're just trying. I think there's still an element of Warner Brothers leadership who was like, okay, this movement is just going to die out. Like, they got what they wanted. Now that's going to die out. Like, oh wait, now they want to restore the Snyderverse. Like, I think they keep thinking that this movement's going to die out. And to be honest with you, I thought that we'd eventually see like a kind of a Frankenstein-ish version of the Snyder Cut in like another 10, 15 years. Like, we eventually saw as close to vision as they were able to with the Richard Donner Superman 2, which had unfinished effects or had old footage that they kind of reworked in there. I thought we'd eventually get something like that. Like, it was definitely something that was still not finished, but in like 15, 20 years, Warner Brothers would eventually throw us a bone, and like, that's what we get. When they finally announced it, I still couldn't believe it. But you know what? HBO Max has gotten $180 from me over the last year because I subscribed simply on the promise of, this is what we're giving you. You got it. You know what? I'm still going to give you my money because I want to be able to go watch that. I've watched in the black and white version. They got the DC hub on there now with all the stuff that was in the DC universe. So like, you keep giving me premium DC content, you can have my $15-16 every month until the day I die.
Absolutely right. And then the hardcore fans, and I'm guilty of this because I was right on there too, pushing for Funko Pops, pushing for statues and all there. And it's like, all right, well, every time a donation campaign came up, we were there pushing it and getting it up there. And now that we're getting merch, I'm seeing it at the shop and I'm like, look, I got to put my money where my mouth is. I got to support this thing too. So I'm getting all the Funko Pops. I'm getting the dual Hot Toys that are coming out with the Nightmare Batman and Black Suit Superman. And it's like, I've got to support this stuff as well with the merch because I want to see Justice League 2 and 3. And it's kind of still weird that we're getting merchandise for the Snyder Cut because I did not expect to get any, especially when we were at day one of streaming Snyder Cut and there were no pops.
And can I just say how weird it is that like Subway, a major corporation, is still on board with this. So like clearly there's someone there who who's a fan. And like while I don't eat often at Subway, whenever I do, I kind of like mutter to myself, thank you, Mr. Subway or Mrs. Subway, because like you've got a major corporation, a major franchise corporation that is behind, that had a major hand in this happening. Like I think everyone focuses on like too much on like what you were talking about with Vega with like, toxic fandoms, like the Snyder movement has done way more good than bad. Like if anything, it's people who I want more comic book movies, whether it's Marvel, DC. I just want quality content that, that I can enjoy, and why people feel like you can't enjoy both. Like I don't get it. Like you have to pick a side. Like, no, you don't. You can enjoy it all.
Yeah, and that's where the distinction comes. Where they have this weird idea of that this fan base, the Snyderverse fan base, is about like cancel out those movies and give us Justice League 2. And it's like I said last week. No, make those movies. I'm not going to see them, but I'm going to watch and support the things that I do want to watch and that I do want to support. And if they want to make the Battinson, go make your Battinson.
At the end of the day, though, if we get no more, I'll be sad if we don't get any more. I'll be very surprised if we don't get any more, given the reaction on social media and how many viewings that this has got to be racking up by now. But at the end of the day, this is still a huge victory for artistic vision.
Yes.
I mean, how many times, like, people complain about how long it was. Like, yeah, whatever. If he got to finish it, it wouldn't have been 4 hours in the theater. We know that. That's not what this was that we got. We got to see his pure, unfiltered vision, which, as far as we know, the only thing they said no to was, like, you can't have Green Lantern at the end of the movie. And because I know that HBO Max is, as far as I'm aware, they're still developing a Green Lantern Corps series. But that's it. It's a huge victory for artistic integrity, and to see like one person's like vision achieved.
That was such a weird thing for them to say no to, because Zack said he almost walked away from finishing the Snyder Cut when they wouldn't let him use his Jon Stewart footage. Yeah. And his argument was, you guys are talking about a multiverse. Why not have two Jon Stewarts and let fans decide which one they want to see? But eventually he did concede to like, look, if that's the one thing, then fine. We'll refilm it. We'll do Martian Manhunter instead. And he couldn't use even the old footage from Ben Affleck because there was the rumors that there's a green light on him, and they weren't able to correct that kind of thing.
Also, if it's a cul-de-sac, why couldn't you have green?
That's
Green
true
Lantern?
Too. Jesus, why is it such a big deal?
If this is the end, why can't you have him in that one scene for 2 minutes?
A lot of things don't line up. And
yeah.
Do you think that Zack, being who he is, because he even in one of the interviews, he was talking about how he kept sharing screenshots from his copy of the Snyder Cut on his laptop. It was all black and white. He would keep putting these things out on Vero without any promise of maybe this will lead to something, and fans were catching on. And he said he didn't even know if he was allowed to share those screenshots, but he would share them anyway because no one ever said anything to him, so he just did it. The additional photography, they told him not to, and he did it anyway. Do you think he's going to release that footage of Jon Stewart Green Lantern at some point in the future?
I don't think he will, but I think Ryan Reynolds will. I mean, it worked for Deadpool because everyone, all signs point, even though it's never been officially confirmed, all signs point to Ryan Reynolds being the leak of that test footage, that animatic footage that got Deadpool finally greenlit. Mm-hmm. And look at how that blew up and what that's turned into. Like, I wouldn't doubt if there's a leak that Zack Snyder is able to completely deny, that the footage eventually leaks out there. But I feel like Zack probably feels that, okay, I know there was a lot of tragedy behind why he had to walk away from that movie, and not only just like, it was kind of like a double tragedy. It was just not only the the death of his daughter, but that he had to walk away from this movie that he poured himself into, that he tried working through, the death of his daughter to complete, and he had no energy left. And I'm sure that he feels like there's been a huge weight lifted having completed his unfiltered vision. And I think he probably has a sense of peace. If I don't get to do more, at least I got to finish this. If they give me more money and they want me to do more, well, you know what? I have a story ready to go.
Is that not amazing still to you that he has it in him to make a Justice League 2 and 3? He has since said he would do it if they wanted him to, but he didn't let himself get jaded enough to, look, I just want to finish this, or even finishing this Snyder Cut. I don't know if I would have the strength to, I'd be like, I don't even want to have anything to do with that studio after what they did to him.
I think he had been reported that when he came back to finish that he took no salary, he took no additional money, so that he wouldn't be beholden to them. I think if they came back to him and said, okay, you know what, we want more, he'll finally be in that position of, okay, I get final cut. I get to, you get like X number of vetoes, but this is my vision. Like, you saw what I did, you saw how the fandom reacted, and me getting to do what I wanted, kind of righted the ship, and just let me do what I want to do. Let me create. And they need to do that. Like, they don't need the DC movies to be Marvel. They can let them be their own thing. Like, even like in the comics, it's weird how like the comics or the movies mirror the comics, not just in how like the characters are, in that the Marvel universe was a very homogenized universe. You had a lot of editorial oversight. You had a lot of like, kind of like very, you had like distinct visions, but you had a universe where there wasn't really a whole lot of artistic exploration. Like, the biggest period of artistic exploration was when you had like your Todd McFarlane's, your Jim Lee's, your Rob Liefeld's, where they really changed like the house style of Marvel, which led to like every family of books. When they found the next hot artist, like Joe Madureira, like all the X-Men books, like, they were looking for artists that would adapt to that. The movies are kind of like that. Whereas like DC, from Paul Levitz to Dan DiDio and on, they've just looked for unique voices. They've let people have like their creative vision artistically, from a writing standpoint. The closest they got to being Marvel is actually when they did New 52, when they tried to make something that was more, like a line wide house style, and for good or ill, they keep trying to course correct from that. Why they can't allow that in the movies is beyond me.
So now that you've seen the regular version of Snyder Cut and Justice is Gray, you had mentioned you've seen both the black and white and the regular one. Which one do you prefer and why?
I kind of like the black and white one.
Me too.
And I couldn't imagine like that I was going to like that might have the edge, because how Zach would talk about how like this is the pure version, like my ultimate vision. Whereas, comic books are very colorful. They're very, I don't know, they're very bombastic and very explosive. And Zack Snyder's always played with a mostly like desaturated palette. Like, the one thing that constantly would like be an source of irritation for me is that he was always desaturating stuff. But then, like I said, with Superman suit and BVS, like, he did up the saturation on his suit, so it looked like a progression. But then when I saw like the black and white version, it had kind of like a horror element. Like, this is almost like a Twilight Zone version of Justice League, where it's like you've got a little bit of Hitchcock in this scene, you got a little bit of Twilight Zone. Like, it's weird, like how like the tension seemed a little more amped up. Like, there was some scenes seemed a little bit creepier, a little bit more tense, and I kind of like it. It's like when you see a like a Jim Lee comic, that whenever Jim Lee comic comes out, it's got like the highest level of coloring. But when you see like, and not just Jim Lee, but like any artist, sometimes when you get to see just like the black and white or gray tones of the work. Sometimes it's a little bit more expressive. I mean, this is kind of like Ansel Adams meets Alfred Hitchcock and Twilight Zone, like in this black and white version, Justice's Gray version. Like I really, really dug it.
I hope that he does when and if Justice League 2 and 3 happen, that there is a Justice's Gray version for those as well. But that maybe he goes back and does some Justice's Gray versions of BVS and Man of Steel. I think people like me would buy it again just to have it in that format. And I've heard this thing on Twitter of like, well, just turn down the saturation. And it's like, well, if you've seen Logan in that noir version, it's not just a matter of removing the colors. They have to change the contrast of the blacks and the whites. And it's a whole different process to deconvert something from color to black and white. And one of the things that I loved seeing is the special effects look different in black and white because of that. The film grain is way more noticeable now, and I think Army of the Dead is the first movie he's filmed fully digitally, I think. But this one was done in traditional film, and you can see all of that in the black and white version a lot clearer than in the color version.
Yeah, like I said, it's a whole different level of appreciating it. And you know what? Give Zack Snyder like artistic direction over a Batman black and white maxi series. You know, let him just like creatively oversee, like bring in a bunch of different directors, do like, you know, like do HBO Max, like get Zack Snyder to do, you know, show run a Batman black and white series. Every episode's directed by someone else. You go wherever you want, but as long as you stick with like his version of doing black and white, it would be amazing.
Fantastic. Matt, anything else you want to cover on the Snyder Cut before we finish up today's episode?
Yeah, you did the spoiler warning at the beginning. Like, whoever's listening, if you haven't seen it yet, get your life straight. Like, find the time. Like, you don't have to watch it all 4 hours at once. Just watch a chapter. The next day, watch the next chapter. Next day, watch the next chapter. Like, in a week, you'll have seen it. Like, but get your life straight if you haven't seen it.
It's really fascinating how many people have really seen this thing. I'll play it at the shop and families will come in and they're like, oh, look, it's the Snyder Cut. And it's like, it captured the general audience. And that's amazing to me. I thought it was going to be, like Zach said, a film just for the fans. It's not for the bloggers. It's not for the reviewers, but it really did capture everyone's attention. And everyone, mom's telling me I prefer this over the other version. And I'm like, yes.
The only thing that I know that Terrio talked about it, actually going back to his quote, you know, in his interview, that like the studio, like Warner Brothers, basically gave him the script. He had to the movie had to be longer because they said no matter what, the next movie is Justice League. So you've got a lot more creative lifting to do with introducing these other characters. So like his movie couldn't be shorter. We saw having that extra runtime was absolutely to the benefit of telling the story that you needed to tell. If it had been done more like we're introducing one character, this is a different way of doing it. The movies were longer. But if you look at every version of every movie that Zack Snyder has done, the longer version has always been better, whether it's Watchmen. I think there was a few more scenes in 300, but that was more of the deleted scene category. And then like this, like if you have unfiltered Zack Snyder, you tell the whole story, you get a much better movie. Does he need to, you know, if he needs to split things up, hey, I'm for it. If it's like Justice League, if this has been released as two separate movies in the same year, cool. I'd be about it. But let him just tell his story.
That's a perfect place to end it right there. Let the man tell his story. Matt, it has been an absolute pleasure having you back on the show after several years, and it's as if we've been podcasting since. It's been really natural.
It was great. Thank you so much for having me on. It was great nerding out with you. And
the Brokehead Core member that's on the other side listening to this, where can they find you in case they want to continue the conversation with you?
Well, you know, it's funny because like over the last year, I've been kind of like dialing back my social media presence, just kind of like getting to know, you know, I've been fully invested in my burgeoning relationship, newly engaged. So like, I really haven't been on Facebook too much, but you can kind of see like what I've been up to on, if you go on Instagram, look for Madner.com. That's spelled out DOTCOM. Even though I haven't been active there, you can see that I'm fully a DC fanboy on there. There's a lot of art that I do on there. And then find me on Facebook. Just look for facebook.com/Madner.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And I can also personally say that Matt has recently joined our Discord lounge too. So if anyone wants to chat him up on there, you can see him on the side log. And if you want to add him, you can find another way to do that on Discord, which is also linked up in our description. My call to action this week will be if you want some The Reasons I'm Broke merch or even other properties. There's other shops that have put up like their own parody t-shirts of Batman, Watchmen, all of that. Those are available on our TeePublic store at thereasonsimbroke.com. You will find a tab for merch. It'll take you straight to the storefront. More than just t-shirts. There's mugs, face masks, tank tops, pillows, all kinds of great stuff on there. And all of that helps keep the show running. Otherwise, thank you so much once again, Matt, for joining on the co-host chair. Looking forward to you coming back on the rotation with the rest of the guys.
Absolutely looking forward to it. Eat fresh.
I love it. Yes, there it is. And Brokehead Core, thank you once again. I've been Daniel, and all will be well.
All will be well. Who would be your lineup of Green Lantern characters for this show if HBO Max ever like finishes bringing this on board? Like it feels like it's been development hell for years.
It does feel that way, and they've confirmed the Green Lantern that I want to see already with Sinestro. And they haven't said if he's going to be a Yellow Lantern yet, but they said he's going to be in there, and we got a little bit of him in the Ryan Reynolds movie. We got some of him in the Green Lantern, the animated series, which was amazing. But if they can properly do the Sinestro Corps War, or even just adventures of him and Hal Jordan as Green Lanterns, because they got along when they were Green Lanterns. They both fought against the Guardians and didn't like what they were doing, and that's my character right there. I just want him in any lineup, villain or hero. I don't care. That's what I want to see.
I wish I would say bring Mark Strong back, but they already re-brought him back into the DCEU with him being Dr. Savannah in Shazam. But yeah, I would love to see more Sinestro. I was really excited for when they were doing going to do a Green Lantern Corps movie, and they described it like Lethal Weapon in space, where you've got one guy who's like, where it would have been like Sinestro would have been Murtaugh and Hal Jordan would have been Riggs or whatever, but like, man, there's just so much rich history. I would love to see them build up to the Sinestro Corps War. But give me, you got to have John Stewart, and I would love if they brought back Diggle from Arrow, because like they kind of ended that series with like him getting the Green Lantern ring.
Yeah, what was up with that? Because that character himself has never been a Green Lantern, from what that I know of, at least.
No, so everyone loved David Ramsey's like Diggle character so much, and his name was John Diggle. Diggle was from the writer Andy Diggle. It was a nod to him, but people so badly like wanted him to be John Stewart that they were like, what if his middle name was Stewart? And then they eventually brought in Ernie Hudson as like his stepfather. His stepfather's last name was Stewart.
Okay, so like
they kept winking and nodding to like, and then his costume, like he had taken over as Arrow for a couple of times, like his Green Arrow a couple of times, like while Ollie was away, like either when he was in prison or they thought he was dead. And then his Spartan costume, when he got that, went from being black with like red trim and piping to like in the last season or two, like now it had green piping and like this mask and grip. So it looked like they were evolving him towards that. And then when the series ended, it like the last scene you see him in, something crashes to Earth, like right by like a moving van that he's about to get in and leave Star City. And he goes to like this little crater. There's a box in the crater. He opens it up, and there's this green glowing light. You don't see a Green Lantern ring, but like that was basically them. And then when they brought John Wesley Shipp back as like the '90s Flash when they were starting to set up Crisis, and he saw Diggle. He's like, John, you don't have your ring.
Okay.
so in some version of the multiverse, he is Green Lantern. He is the John Stewart Green Lantern. So like, I think it would be fun if they brought him in as John Stewart Green Lantern in the Green Lantern Corps series. Like I'd be all over that.
Well, especially if they establish that in other universes he is the John Stewart Green Lantern. So if they were to bring him back as John Stewart Green Lantern in even the HBO Max Green Lantern series, it wouldn't have to be tied into the CW because they've already established that he exists elsewhere as a Green Lantern.
Exactly.
That's a good,
all right. Like if you're going to lean into the multiverse, fucking lean into it.
We need Mogo too, by the way.
Absolutely. You cannot do a Green Lantern series without Mogo.
I don't care if it's a whole episode of just him floating in space, 40 minutes. I'm like, great, we got a Mogo episode. I'm happy.
Yeah. I mean, has there been a? I mean, they even brought Mogo in the animated, the one season of the animated series. Like he's like one of your must-haves.
Absolutely.